Hi, this is Victoria Meyer. Welcome back to the Chemical Show, where chemicals means business. Today, I am speaking with Mike Gruber from the HCPA. He is the EVP of Government Relations and Public Policy, and we are speaking at HCPA's annual conference in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Mike, welcome to the Chemical Show.
Thanks for having me.
So tell me a little bit about your experience. What got you to where you are here at HCPA and what you do?
Yeah, so I've been with HCPA for just under 3 years. I started out 30 years ago with, at that point in time, a newly minted member of Congress from Washington State, and was thrust from the campaign side of this business into the policy side, doing appropriations, and then climbed the ladder, became a chief of staff for a member of Congress from Iowa, worked for a couple different congressional committees along the way, and then spent 10 years at the Consumer Brands Association, and then made the shift over here to work in chemicals policy for our companies. So it's been a 30-year journey. It'll be a 30-year journey in January.
That's awesome. It's a lot of time working with government.
It is. And I haven't gotten completely gray yet, remarkably.
So let's talk about this CPA's role and how you interface with government and policy. What is that?
Yeah, I mean, HCPA is, a fascinating group of, I think, almost 237 companies that produce products that we depend on every single day to, keep Americans healthy, whether it's, as I tell people on Capitol Hill, we make the products that you find under your kitchen sink or in your garage or in your linen closet. They're the, recognizable brands, but they're also companies that manufacture products that clean these office buildings, whether it's at the Capitol or Senate and House office buildings, whatever it may be. So I think that brings it back to, I understand what we're talking about here and what the complexity to make sure that those companies can innovate and, use new products, new chemical innovations. And then we've got to deal with packaging issues and extended producer responsibility. So we've got a really complex portfolio of issues. And we're a relatively small trade association in the grand scheme of things. But it keeps us busy both at the federal and state level on a whole host of issues, whether it's the Pesticide Registration Improvement Act, which is administered by EPA, or on the state side, it's dealing with PFAS legislation or new household hazardous waste management laws in states like Vermont. So we cover a lot of ground, a lot of complex issues, and we have to educate policymakers and staff that have no idea how any of this works.
Right. Well, and I think it's interesting, as you point out, it's a lot of products that are under the sink, in the laundry room, in the cleaning closet, what have you. And we take it for granted as consumers that they're going to work, that they are safe, and I'm just going to, that means a lot of different things, but that they are able to be used appropriately in a home or in an office, et cetera, and that they do what you want them to do. And yet we also have all of the regulations that apply to make sure that they are lower risk products, relatively safe when you think about human handling, other stuff, et cetera. So it's a lot of issues. It
is, and I think for the work that we do, and we have a small team of lobbyists. I've got a gentleman who lives in Sacramento that handles the West Coast. I've got a colleague here in Washington D.C. that handles the East Coast. Obviously, the West Coast is a very busy place for us. The Northeast is a busy place as well. But we just want to make sure that government agencies, whether it's the federal agency or a state agency, actually is functioning well, doing the job they need to do, but making sure that they're doing it in a way that we can get innovations to market, and that there's a process through which we can provide formal comments and they're considered, and that we have working relationships with regulators both at the federal and state level. So,
well, and so I think that federal and state balance is interesting because it seems like, and we were talking just before we hit the record button, that balance has shifted.
Totally.
And it's shifted significantly in the past several years, at least.
It has.
Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so when I left Capitol Hill in 2012 to become a federal lobbyist for the Consumer Brands Association, which at that time was grocery manufacturers, my primary work was federal. It's where we could work on legislation that would, say, have a federal preemption provision to try and prevent states from, going haywire and passing multiple packaging labeling requirements that would create a patchwork problem for the industry. Right. Over time, we have seen states really almost race to be the strongest regulator on ingredients, on packaging, on sustainability measures, in the chemical space. So, 10, 12 years ago, what was 100% federal for me has now become probably 85% state.
Wow, that's a big shift.
It's a huge shift. I mostly cover, on the federal side, at least I have been for the last 2 years, number one, when I arrived here, was making sure that the Pesticide Registration Improvement Act was reauthorized. We got that done early in December of 2022. And since then, it's been trying to make sure that our regulatory agencies, or the offices within EPA, are funded to a level that they can hire the right number of people, modernize their information technology systems.
Yeah.
But after that process kind of comes to a close, I'm testifying in states like Maryland, or going to Vermont or Albany, because that's where the real action is, where you've got states that have a short timeline and they have ambitious plans, and they can create a national standard far quicker than Congress can.
Yeah, that's crazy. And I think both as a consumer and as a business person in the chemical industry, I've certainly seen that change over time. And for decades, it was always California, right? California had special labeling on, it felt like every consumer product that was in my home. But yeah, we're hearing about this in, as you point out, many other states now. Right,
correct. And now I think a trend that I'm seeing is states, mostly progressive states, that are looking to bypass the regulatory process. We're seeing this on PFAS, potentially in Colorado. We've seen it on issues in Minnesota. I've seen it in Vermont, where we're not going to write a regulation around this. We're going to put our guidance. We'll provide monthly updates online. And so that puts us in the position of having to communicate very carefully with these government regulators, because now every email almost carries the same weight as formal comment. And we don't have the opportunity that we prefer, which is working with our member companies to make sure that we've got formal comments in the solid right order, that everybody's comfortable with how we're communicating with these agencies. And so I addressed this with our board of directors yesterday, that this is a growing concern that we have, and we need to tell the states, follow your Administrative Procedure Act here. There's a process that needs to be followed, and shortcutting this is going to get everybody into trouble.
Yeah, makes sense. So let's turn and talk a little bit about the new government administration coming in, right? So January, right around the corner.
Yeah.
Trump administration comes in. There's not just changes in at the top of the House, but also changes across the government, both federal and state.
Yep.
What are you guys focusing on as that administration comes to bear?
So, as I just said, we've been 85% federal. I've been telling our member companies that I'm going to be spending most of my time in the U.S. Capitol, probably for the next 4 to 6 months. Yeah. There's a lot of enthusiasm to cut government, reduce the size and scope, potentially fire career employees. We're a little conflicted with some of that. Sure. There's some enthusiasm, but there's also a lot of us that are like, we've developed relationships with some good career people that are trying to do the right thing within the agencies that we work with every single day. So in some ways, the first order of business is trying to go in and preserve some of the accounts that may be targeted for budget cuts. We're not working with the EPA that has, benefited from billions of dollars in grant funding. The electrification of school buses was a great idea for somebody, but that was $5 billion that came into EPA and then left EPA. So making sure that the regulatory functions actually, again, are funded to a level that you're maintaining, the right number of people to do the work that's business critical regulatory function. That's we've got to preserve that.
Well, and certainly one of the topics of conversation I've had with a number of people throughout the industry, I'm sure you have as well, is even things like the ability to get new products approved so that we can be more sustainable, so that we can be greener, et cetera, which requires functional EPA, FDA, USA, whatever, pick your alphabets, but it requires that.
So I think Congress is going to explore the Toxic Substances Control Act and see if there are any changes that can be made. I think with a Republican trifecta, there's an opportunity to try and have a discussion around what changes are absolutely possible. I was part of the process where we amended TSCA through the Lautenberg amendments. That was a tough hill to climb.
Yeah.
But it hasn't worked out in the way that we really want it to and need it to, because it has stifled innovation, and that's a huge problem for our member companies. So we've got to figure out what's the art of the possible in changing TSCA. And so we'll be providing our recommendations to the committees of jurisdiction here in the next couple of weeks, at least identifying where those obstacles are within the agency, and we'll see what happens. That'll be one of our top priorities in the first half of the year.
I'm looking forward to see how that manifests. So, Mike, let's turn and talk a little bit about leadership.
Sure.
You've obviously taken on a lot of leadership roles throughout your career. You've interfaced with a lot of leaders
people.
when we think about both government as well as private companies. What advice do you have for others when they think about leadership and maybe following a path that you followed or that you see others following?
Yeah, the first thing that comes to my mind is listening and learning. These are complex issues. When I was a young staffer 30 years ago at age 25, working for a House appropriator and having to open up that first budget justification, we used to call it the General Accountability Office reports to figure out what's working and what's not.
Yeah.
It's trying to understand how government operates, how Congress operates, being humble and understanding that there's a whole lot that everybody needs to learn in this business. And I've been doing this for 30 years. I'm learning something new every single day. So I have learned to listen more than I speak, and that has served me well. And until I'm absolutely comfortable with what the position is of our association and its members, you can get yourself into trouble very quickly in this business by talking too much. Yeah. So that's listening and learning has served me well, and remaining as humble as possible.
Love it. Thank you. That's great. And Mike, thank you for joining us today. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.